And in terms of vulnerability, I thought about that too. You're like, well, where are you most vulnerable, or what's challenging? Everything is challenging because everything is new. I hadn't ever written a grant application. I've never been a producer. I've never been a director. I've never built, it's all new. So it's all challenging.
Thank you, Kristina, so much for making time to speak with me today. I appreciate it a lot.
My pleasure.
Your choice of art form, puppetry, is something that I didn't even recognize was a thing for adults until you spoke to me about what you do. And I just thought that was fascinating. And so I thought we could start by just having you talk a little bit about how you got into doing puppetry.
Well, as you know, I was living in the country with my 4 kids. And when my youngest was around 3 or 4, I realized I wanted to actually get back into children's theater, particularly. I've always liked children's theater, even though I didn't do a lot. I did some in my 20s. I really like that. Kids as an audience is really fun because they're very participatory. So anyway, to make a long story short, I went to see a play with puppets, and I realized because I was isolated in the country, I realized I needed other people to work with, and puppetry would allow me to play 2 characters at once, for example, rather than necessarily hire another actor. Actors were scarce where I was, so that was the very first thought I had, and I went to see a few plays, and then my mind was blown. I went to see, I actually only saw a video of a play called Nombril, in which a kids show, I don't actually know who put it on, in Quebec. And there's a woman who's pregnant, and so you see sort of inside her pregnant belly, you see the puppet baby. I just thought that was amazing. So that was one of the first things I saw. And then when I realized that there was a puppetry program given at UQAM, a 2-year program, intensive, I applied.
Do you see a connection between it? Because I know when you were younger, you danced. So the use of your body as a physical, as something you use physically on a stage, do you see the connection between that and your attraction to puppetry as physical manipulation on a stage?
Not initially. It never really occurred to me until we started to work, my colleague Céline Chevrier and I, on our piece Statue. That's when I realized that I really wanted to use my body in that way with puppets, as opposed to just staying in the typical space of a puppet where you're behind a little wall and you're, or you're up top jiggling marionettes, which is a whole other specialization. And also, I mean, for sure, it helps me in understanding what the puppet might be saying, because I have a fairly good sense of what my body does and looks like and what it might be interpreted as meaning if I do a certain movement. So yeah, there is a connection, but I didn't really see it until I started doing it.
Can you explain a bit more? Because not everyone might be familiar with the idea of the person being present with the puppet on the stage as opposed to behind a screen or above with strings.
Yeah, okay. So that's the sort of the birth, and, don't quote me on my historical facts, but the birth of contemporary puppetry, I guess, would be in the 70s, where the puppeteer was no longer hidden necessarily behind anything. So the puppeteer is on stage with the puppet, not necessarily pretending not to be there. And so that allows for really interesting relationships as well, because I can either, as the puppeteer, really focus on the puppet and you as the audience see me, but I'm not acknowledging that you see me. So I'm just really being the puppet. Or I can actually, play as a manipulator, I can have a character, and I can enhance the story, or I can even comment on what's going on. I can take it it becomes like an aside, I guess, or I can even have a direct relationship with a puppet and interact with the puppet itself. Or, somebody else is manipulating the puppet. I can be a character on the stage with the puppet, playing with the puppet. So it opens up a lot of possibilities, which I find really interesting.
And I guess the other thing I was thinking is the similarity between dance and the puppetry that you particularly do is that you don't have words. Your puppet shows typically, I think, are physical only.
Yeah. So far, that's what I'm interested in. And I was thinking about why. I think partly because I just find it interesting to tell a story without words. I don't think I don't want to rely, or I like the idea of not relying on words to tell a story. And it means that the actions have to be super clear. And I mean, I'm certainly not an expert yet in that kind of clarity for the puppet. I still have to think about it a lot, but it means the choices you make of the puppet movements have to be quite clear, because you can't rely on the puppet saying, "Oh, I'm so sad," to express sorrow. You have to figure out, how does the puppet physically manifest sorrow, because their face doesn't change, right? So it's all in the body.
I find that fascinating, because when I think about interpreting emotions, for me, it's very much based on maybe what somebody's saying, although it might not be truly representative of their feeling, but I will still base something on what they say and their facial features, their facial expressions. And having to rely only on sort of bigger motor movements and maybe head just positioning, I guess, but no change in the face. I find that kind of fascinating to be able to figure out how to do that.
But you saw the play that we just finished, and the music and the lighting totally tells the story as well. Especially the music. Both equally. Without the music, you wouldn't be able to understand, oh, she must be sad here because the music is kind of pulling on her heartstrings. That's a big part of it.
So when you put on a show, it's a pretty collaborative effort with the different professionals that you work with, lighting, music, set design.
Yeah, I think, and also the piece Statue that I did with Céline, we really built the story by exploring in the space. We didn't have and then she goes to the store, and then she buys milk, and then she goes home, and then she has a conflict. We really developed the story through movement, and likewise with, although I had a baseline for L'amour te reviendra, I knew the storyline, but much of the action happened, was set through rehearsals and trials. It's called scenic writing, or écriture scénique, or écriture de plateau, scenic, like writing on the stage, kind of. So that could happen also with music simultaneously. It didn't so much for either of those. We would try something, and then the composer would, Alexander McSween, he would propose some stuff, and then we try the action with. Anyway, so it's collaborative, yes, but it doesn't necessarily happen simultaneously. We're not all together necessarily figuring it out.
That's cool. And also that part, because I just spoke with somebody yesterday about that balance between planning and controlling something and being sort of directive about it, and then the part that just emerges through the doing of it, that you didn't necessarily know that you were going to arrive there, but you had some thought around what you were going to try, and then you end up somewhere you might not have been able to think your way to, but you were able to create your way to.
Yeah, I think that I'm guessing that that's different for different directors, different collectives as well. Is there one person more controlling, or is it equal? It's quite challenging to know that balance in creation, because I worked with, as you know, for the last piece, I worked with two really good puppeteers, Iris Richard and Céline Chevrier, and they both kept proposing really great things. And then suddenly I was wondering, is this still, do I still get to say that I wrote this? Because in fact, the collaboration was so good and strong. And then I found that challenging to know how do you credit people if they've contributed so much to the development of your piece, because I don't have a text, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Because we can't really tease out all the things that influenced us to do what we do now anyway. So whether it's really explicit because you're working with a group of people in a moment and they're contributing ideas in the moment, but we have, like generations of influences behind us and across from us, all the things that we see and hear and experience, that you would still have been the person who said, this is something interesting. I'm going to bring this group of people together and create something different. And that was always you, I guess, but you acknowledge all of the contributions of the people around you.
Well, for example, we're rehearsing a scene and typically the puppet goes in front of the tree in this scene, but then one of the manipulators says, oh, how about we go up inside the tree, and what if this happens? And then it's my job, I guess, as the director, because this was my first time really just directing, to say, yes, that's a wonderful idea, let's try that. Or be like, no, I don't like that at all, that doesn't work. But typically I think you should say, yes, let's try that, and then see, right? But then that means that she just created at that moment. She just wrote that moment. I haven't figured it out quite, but
I'm not sure might not really be an answer to that. That's just, or maybe you just personally have to find that line where you're comfortable to say, that's not what I had in mind. That's not the original intention, versus that enhances or changes maybe where I was going. And that's okay too.
Well, and that's okay too. You have to be quite confident it's all about, it sounds so hokey, but it's all really about trust. And the more you trust your collaborators and the more they trust you, and that they can propose stuff without being shot down, then it's just like this bouillonnement, like a, bubbling of creativity that happens. And then, it's amazing. It's wonderful, really.
It's interesting because I have way less experience in collaborative work. I do in my work, but on the things that I do for myself, if it's writing or drawing, it's just me and I just do it. And people might give me some feedback, but there's not a lot in the creation of it that's shared, as opposed to something like what you do, which is very collaborative and very shared and sort of co-created in those moments where you're figuring out what you're going to do.
Except that in this last project, in the end, I had the final say. So, I did maintain sort of ultimate control, which was great for me. But as opposed to one thing that was challenging for the other piece was that my colleague and I didn't necessarily always see eye to eye, just in terms of what we wanted to say, and also in our aesthetic sensibilities. So sometimes better things come of it, and sometimes I feel like the thing just gets diluted because both people end up having to compromise. It's hard to know, do I compromise on this and then she'll compromise on that, or okay, we'll meet halfway, but then it's like this, it's not a really strong decision. I don't know. And it's much, much longer to work really like that. We just worked and worked and worked because you have to negotiate every single thing.
Because for Statue, it was creation, but two peers, you and Céline.
Co-creation, yeah.
Co-creation. And in the project that followed, you really had the leading role. And you played you had many hats in that. In addition, you directed, you created the puppets.
Yeah, I worked, I did the puppets. I had some help with the props. And I hired a set designer, Sarah Sabourin, and she took over the whole set part. And then, the lighting designer, Flavia Hevia, she worked really hard and had like 42 cues or something like that. It's crazy. All to say that, yes, for Statue, Céline and I, shared the responsibility of what was going to ultimately be on stage. And for L'amour te reviendra, I had the final say.
So can you talk a little bit more about L'amour te reviendra as far as the theme, what the story was about?
It's ultimately about, for me, it's about our relationship with nature, but it doesn't really, it's not that explicit, I don't think, in the play. So it's a little wood creature person. She's not human, but she's humanoid, I guess, because she lives alone in a rusty kettle and in the woods, and it appears that she's looking for friends, and she's not. She's kind of failing in her quest until she finds an egg, which she steals and hopes that it will hatch in order that she gets her friend, and then she's very excited, and ultimately she loses patience and the egg breaks because she's impatient, and then she's very sad. She buries the egg. She lights a candle. A moth comes along, burns its wing. She nurses the moth back to health, and eventually realizes the moth is ready to fly off, and she kind of unfortunately has to let that moth go. And it's kind of, I feel like it's sad, but it's not really sad because she's supposed to. The takeaway for me is that Bea, the main character, has learned better how to it sounds really dumb, live in harmony with nature, or be in harmony with nature, or what kind of, she can't grab the the caterpillar and like take it home. She can't she can't be friends with the snowman because the snowman breaks, whatever, that kind of thing.
That's not stupid.
Well, no, it's not stupid. I mean, it comes really from the heart anyway.
What do you think brought you to write that story? Well, not write, I shouldn't say write because it's not text, but to
yeah, but you can say write.
Okay.
You mean what motivated me?
Mm-hmm. Like what it means to you personally. What is it about that story that came from you and you thought was interesting to share?
Well, there were a few things. One, the very first thing was I took a creative writing class in my 20s, and one of the things they say is, "Oh, write what you know about." So at the time, I had 4 small kids. So I was like, okay, well, I know about taking care of things, and then I was observing people that I know, and I realized, oh, you know what? It seems that everybody wants to take care of. Everybody has this impulse, whether you have kids or not, whether it's a pet or a plant, or so this caretaking or love giving thing seemed to be quite universal from what I saw. So that was one of the things. And then another thing I thought about was that we're really completely disconnected from nature. You can't take care of something that you don't know exists. So my idea was to put animals and plants or whatever on the stage that are real, because I do also remember as an adult watching shows for kids with my kids being annoyed when there was a bird and it wasn't a specific bird, it was just birdie or flower. So I wanted to be more specific, in the hopes also that, well, for one, because I'm in love with all the flora and fauna in the Laurentians, where it's the location that inspires me. And where was I going with that? Oh, and yeah, and in the hopes that maybe somebody would see the play and say, "Oh, I know that bird. I've seen those birds in my backyard." So just to notice what's around us as a very tiny little step in, without wanting to seem too grand, but what's the word I'm looking for? For environmental stewardship, really.
No, it's interesting because Well, first of all, it's one of the reasons I love taking walks with you is because I'll say, oh, there's a pretty bird. And you're like, that's a nuthatch. Or I really like that. That's very pretty flower. You're like, well, that's a succotash. I'm like, I'm one of those people that walks around saying bird, flower.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter provided you're, if you're enjoying nature, fine. It doesn't really matter whether you know how to name it.
No, but I think it's interesting to know, to see how things like the enormous variety, the diversity that surrounds us. And I do think you're right about it, making it, that being one step towards caring more, because you notice it, you pay attention to it. And when you pay attention, you might be more likely to take that next step to actually care, or notice when there's less of those. Maybe there's a million crows, but there's fewer and fewer nuthatches. And that probably is not a very good thing.
Well, and also I think kids particularly, you can interest a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old in, oh, look, there's this, did you notice that this flower looks like this flower, but it's much smaller, but this one is yellow and this one is pink. It's just fun.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it inspired me.
You got great feedback from the kids when I was in the initial show for La Mort reviendra.
Yeah, and when we played it in front of a bigger children's audience, they were quite wild, but it was fun. And I look forward to, honing the whole thing in front of an audience, because that will really tell us. A friend of mine who has a children's theater company said it's really in playing that you realize what parts you're going to maybe take a bit more time with, or what parts you want to, speed up.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too, because it means that the work is never finished. So it'll continue to evolve. And every time you perform it, you have an opportunity to enhance it, revise it, edit it, change something about it, and just see how the audience responds to that.
I mean, eventually you do start to just play the same thing, but the audience will still occasionally react differently.
Right.
It really is quite interesting to see that. Sometimes they laugh and sometimes they don't laugh. And you did exactly the same thing. So
interesting. I'm going to ask you what it means for you to call yourself an artist, because that's something else that we've spoken about in the past. So what it takes to feel confident to say, I am an artist.
Well, I thought about that this morning, and as you know, it's been a fairly recent that I that I would call myself an artist. And one of the hesitations I have, and it's not really a cop-out to say this, is that I think actually everybody is creative and artistic. So why do I get to say I'm an artist? I feel like that's a bit strange. I don't feel comfortable with that. But also, I mean, calling myself an artist requires that I take myself seriously. And that I was thinking about that, the fact that just saying that makes me feel super vulnerable. That's the part about, if you want to talk about feeling vulnerable, that's kind of where I feel the most vulnerable, in saying, well, I'm an artist, which means that suddenly I'm open to being judged as such, right? Which means that any work I do as an artist is open to criticism. As opposed to, if I don't call myself an artist, I'm just fooling around, then I'm less vulnerable to that kind of criticism. Or yeah. So for me, being an artist, yeah, it's I don't really like it. I don't really like to say it, but yeah, it just means taking myself seriously and believing that I have something to say, I guess.
I find that so interesting, because I understand that there's not maybe like a clear line, and you don't want to say like these people are not artists, because it seems like we're denying those people their creativity or their opportunity to do interesting things that will be cool experiences for other people, like just creating these experiences in the world. But on the other hand, I mean, I do think that probably everyone who has ever known you for your life would be in their minds, oh yeah, Kristina's an artist. And there's not necessarily an expectation or judgment around it. It's just the nature of who you are as a person and what I see you're attracted to and what kinds of things that you do in your life. And art creating art and learning about art and enjoying art is such a big part of your life compared to other people that I know who are not engaged in that way. So I would not even have thought for a moment until we had the conversation before this that there would even be a question, because there's no judgment that comes from outside, for me anyway. I just think it's because you like doing stuff like that. And you devote a lot of time and energy in your life, considering you're also a single mother raising 4 children. Every other ounce of energy that you have is pretty much devoted to that.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess I moved away from it. I didn't do anything artistic or creative really for like 10 or 15 years when my kids were small. So I've sort of come back and to my roots, which when I have a cégep in theater. So I did theater, professional theater. But then I didn't do anything for 20, until my kids were a bit older. For like 20 years, I did nothing creative, or, I did a little bit of music, but not really anything serious. So it was hard for me to, not hard, but it was a journey for me to get back to that and to then say, oh, I guess maybe I'm an artist, which happened maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago.
I guess the only thing I would say is that when you were in the country raising your kids, some part of you was composing L'amour te reviendra, and it was just waiting for the opportunity that you had a little bit more time.
No. Yeah, for sure.
So your mind was there.
Well, I mean, I did have that story written many years before actually being able to do it. So I had the story before going to puppetry school, etc., etc. So yeah, so there you go. I just wasn't quite ready to call myself an artist until I did.
And was that about being able to say, here's stuff that I've done? So it's not about, say, like, here, I can show you this.
Well, for myself, it was, I had to convince myself. It wasn't so much, well, yes, I had to convince myself before being able to then tell anybody else that that's what I considered myself to be. But I guess for me, calling myself an artist now means that I didn't consider myself an artist for so many years. That means I missed out, which makes the time now, there's kind of a desperation about it, which on one hand, it's a desperation. On the other hand, I'm incredibly motivated, without, tooting my own horn, but I work hard to get, where I'm at right now. I have worked hard to, and I will continue to.
What I admire about you very much, though, is in spite of feeling that way, you jump in with both feet, 100%, go after the grants, go after opportunities to collaborate with people, get your stories made. You have, since you went to puppetry school and jumped into this, it has been 1000% full force, even knowing that how challenging it was to do all of this stuff for the first time, feeling maybe like you should be doing this when you're 20. You wish you had been doing that, and then you'd be somewhere else now. Maybe, who knows? Yeah. But you are putting every ounce of yourself into these projects. And I find that absolutely so inspiring, so amazing.
Oh, well, thanks. It's not because, I'm so wonderful and strong. It's because of this kind of like, I need to do this. At our age, it's there. I'm aware of the finiteness, if that's a word, of life. So it's now, or like, it's not in 10 years that it's going to be easier. Yeah. It's not even like, oh, do I feel like it's like, I got to do this. It's not even a question.
And you are.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, thanks.
I am excited to know where you go with L'amour te reviendra, because you're going to have opportunities to play that now in different places. What are some of the places you're going for that?
Well, The first place that we're for sure going, but out of the country, is we've been invited by Patricia Gomis of l'Association Jarama to go to Senegal next June. So I'm super excited about that. She saw the piece and she was explaining to us that there's really no children's theater in Senegal at all. So she invites companies to tour on a regular basis throughout the year. And so we've been invited, and we're super excited about that. And also, well, I mean, I have to get on that, put my show out there to the different presenters in Montreal and Quebec, whatever. And, across, in the years I've made a few contacts across Canada. There's a guy in Calgary that I know, etc. So I hope to tour it.
But I find that super interesting too, because one of the conversations I've had before with TJ was in his show, in his monologues, he's very specific about his life and the events that have shaped him and how he's responded to those. And even though he's very specific about the particular things that he's gone through, people in the audience can relate to it, even though their lives might be very different, but they tap into kind of like the fundamental human experiences of what he's describing. And so similar to you, it's interesting because the animals and the bird and the caterpillar are very specific really to like our Quebec, like in the Laurentians. And you've made a point of talking about that. Like, that's not just a bird. That is a specific kind of bird that we see around here. And so if you take that show to Senegal, even though it's super specific in the types of, like, those kids might look at it and say, never seen that kind of bird before, but it's specific that they can say, but it's exact. Like, I know there's a bird that we have a bird in our backyard and it looks a little bit different. That not our bird's called this and this bird's called that. But I find that interesting too. In that super specificity, you make it possible to be really broad and universal in your appeal to your audience.
But I mean, if you're TJ writes, I mean, that does tend to happen. The more you are specific, the more easily people, well, it depends, but people can project themselves onto, because there are universal human emotions and themes, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I like that about a wordless narrative as well, because it opens it up for interpretation depending who you are, really. So the adults will take away something quite different from the children when they see the show. Or in the case of Statue, depending where you are in your notions of gender and male-female relationships, whatever, you'll interpret it differently. One of the things that I did want to say about an important moment in my journey toward puppetry, or my conviction that that's the medium I wanted to use, was I went to see a retrospective done by La Pire Espèce, which is a object theater company in Montreal. They did a retrospective of this guy called Felix Mirpt, who was a German puppeteer who came here in the 70s, I believe, or maybe even the 50s. I'm not sure. Anyway, they used his puppets. He died in the 90s or late 80s. And they did a retrospective of his work using all his puppets. He was quite innovative. And so he did the play Wojciech, which is quite a tragic play by Georg Büchner. I don't know if they had text or not. Anyway, they had the main character, Wojciech, on stage. They were manipulating him. He was like a really ugly puppet. He was short. He was maybe, 2.5 feet tall. There were two manipulators. It was quite dark. They had maybe just one light on him. And like I said, his face was quite ugly, but he looked so sad. I was so moved by how sad he was that I just thought, I don't think he did speak. I just thought, this is an amazing medium. Like, he's so ugly and I still care about him without his saying anything. So that was something that really convinced me about why puppets are, there's a lot of potential there for moving people. I find that interesting, how how we can move people, figuratively with an object. It's a dumb object, but if I like imbue it with some kind of life, I can fool you, and you're going to be sad if it dies.
I just think it's a form of art that, I'm going to speak for myself, but I don't think is that familiar to a lot of adults.
No, I mean, we certainly don't have a history of puppetry in North America as much as they do in other parts of the world. And we do associate, when you think of puppets, you think of Muppets and children. But there's a lot of amazing stuff done for adults that's very touching and weird sometimes.
And a bit scary,
interesting.
actually.
Yeah, a bit scary. Yeah.
It's always the one that you showed me of it. Was he Australian?
Oh, that guy. Oh yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. There's also like Ilka Schönbein. Ilka Schönbein is one of them. Dura Paiva, he does a lot of dance. He has some text. Ilka Schönbein has no text. She does a lot of prothèse. I don't know how you...
Prosthesis?
Like prosthetic, kind of.
Oh, prosthetic.
So she'll make a mask of her face, and then she'll have like a double of herself, or she'll have like an extra arm coming out of her own body. It's like quite sometimes even gory and scary, but sort of poetic at the same time.
It's fascinating. Stuff that you can't do with your own body, but you can do it through puppetry.
Yeah.
As extensions of the body.
Well, that's actually something I didn't talk about because I haven't really thought about it too much. But I would say that the advantage of puppets on stage is that they can do things that, and I mean, not only physically can they do things that humans can't, but they can be quite vile and violent in ways that humans are not allowed. Like you could never take a human character on stage and rip its arm off, but you can do it with a puppet, and it's so violent. But then you're asking the audience to react to say, I just ripped the arm off this puppet. The audience is like, oh my God. But on the other hand, it's clear, this is just a puppet, remember? So it's this weird, like, I'm supposed to react, but is this silly? Because I shouldn't be reacting so strongly. After all, it is just a puppet, right? But it allows for a lot of really interesting dynamics.
Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to get a little deep.
You are not a stranger to deep. It's nice having these conversations with you.